Have you ever seen a moment so shocking, so unbelievable, that you thought it could only happen in a movie? A moment when someone the world looked down on suddenly turned out to hold the kind of power that could change everything. What if I told you that inside a courtroom, the very people who thought they were in control had no idea they were humiliating the one person who would soon decide their fate? That is exactly what happened here. But I won't reveal the full truth just yet. Stay with me, because what you are about to hear will shake you. Dear viewers, don't move an inch. Stay with me till the end of this story, because every detail will make your heart heavy with emotion and your mind full of questions. And before we continue, kindly like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below where you are watching from. Now let's go into the story. The morning sun shone softly on the courthouse steps as Allison Edwards made her way toward the large bronze doors. She was dressed in her civilian clothes, carrying a simple briefcase that held her case files for the day. She walked with purpose, her mind focused on the long hours of hearings ahead. To anyone watching, she looked like an ordinary woman on her way to an ordinary job. But the truth of who she was would soon shock everyone in that building. Officer Blake Russell stood at the top of the steps, his uniform neat, his jaw hard with arrogance. He saw Allison approaching, and instantly his eyes narrowed with disgust. To him, she wasn't a professional. She wasn't someone who deserved respect. She was just another black woman who in his mind didn't belong there. As Allison reached the entrance, Blake stepped in front of her. His body language was hostile, his smirk filled with contempt. "Another ghetto rat trying to sneak into the courthouse," he sneered. The words cut through the morning air like a knife. Allison froze. She didn't shout, didn't argue. She simply tightened her grip on her briefcase, her eyes steady and calm. That calmness only seemed to anger Blake more. Without warning, his hand flew across her face with a sharp, loud slap. The sound echoed off the stone walls, drawing the attention of passers-by. Allison's head snapped sideways from the force, and her briefcase fell, scattering papers across the courthouse steps like leaves in the wind. But Blake wasn't done. He grabbed her by the throat and shoved her back against the cold stone wall. His voice dripped with venom. "Filthy animals like you belong in cages, not courthouses." Allison struggled to breathe, the metal cuffs biting into her wrists as he forced her arms behind her back. Her jaw throbbed with pain, but her eyes, her steady, burning eyes, remained fixed on something above his shoulder. The nameplate on the courthouse wall. It read, "The Honorable Judge A. Edwards presiding." Just a few feet away from her own courtroom, Allison Edwards, a respected judge, was being brutalized like a criminal. Other officers gathered around, laughing, pulling out their phones to record. To them, it was entertainment. To Allison, it was humiliation, but also something more. Deep inside, she was already making mental notes. Minutes later, the scene shifted inside the courthouse. The room was buzzing with whispers, but Blake stood tall in front of the temporary judge, Thomas Elliott. His voice was smooth, confident, like a man who had told this story many times before. "Your Honor," he began, "I was conducting routine security when I saw this woman acting suspicious near the courthouse entrance. She refused to show identification, became aggressive, and attempted to force her way inside." Judge Elliott nodded slowly, clearly willing to believe the officer's word. Lauren Clark, the prosecutor, leaned forward at her table. "We recommend charges of trespassing, resisting arrest, and assaulting an officer," she said firmly. Blake's lies flowed easily. He even added details that made Allison look unstable, dangerous. He kept screaming she was important, claiming to be someone powerful, he said with a mocking laugh. "I've seen this playbook before. People like her always pretend to be lawyers or judges to avoid consequences." In the gallery, officers Adam Newman and Jack exchanged smirks. They had heard Blake spin this kind of tale before. Different victim, same script. Allison sat quietly at the defendant's table, handcuffed, her face bruised, her clothes rumpled. She didn't interrupt. She didn't cry. She didn't even defend herself. She simply watched and listened, her expression calm, but her mind sharp as a blade. The stenographer's fingers tapped quickly, recording every lie as truth. The spectators nodded, some rolling their eyes at Allison as if she were just another troublemaker wasting the court's time. The system was working exactly as Blake expected, his word against hers, and everyone was siding with him. But behind Allison's stillness was fire. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was patience. She was waiting, letting him dig deeper into his own lies, knowing that when the time came, every word would collapse around him. Thomas Elliot leaned forward. "Officer Russell, did she attempt to flee or resist?" "Yes, Your Honor," Blake replied quickly. "I had no choice but to use necessary force to protect this courthouse." He pulled out his phone and played a shaky video that conveniently started in the middle of the scuffle, painting him as the hero. Allison looked at the screen, then lowered her eyes, her lips pressing into a faint, knowing smile. She wasn't worried. She was watching his performance like an actor in a bad play. Lauren Clark nodded in agreement. "The evidence is clear, Your Honor. This defendant is trying to make this about race, when in reality she broke the law." The courtroom murmured in agreement. Blake stood taller, confident he had already won. But as Allison sat there, bruised and silent, her calm gaze unsettled a few people in the room. Something about her didn't fit the role he had forced her into. One young law clerk.
The courtroom was silent for a moment, all eyes fixed on Ellison Edwards, the bruised woman in handcuffs. She sat upright at the defendant's table, her back straight, her eyes calm. When Judge Thomas Elliot finally gave her the chance to speak, many expected a desperate outburst or frantic denial. Instead, what came out was steady, measured, and professional. "Your Honor," Allison began, her voice carrying clearly across the room, "I would like to address several inaccuracies in Officer Russell's testimony." Her tone surprised everyone. There was no panic, no begging, no brokenness. It was the voice of someone who understood the law, someone who had spent years inside a courtroom. For the first time, Judge Elliot leaned back, curious. Allison turned her head slowly, her gaze sweeping across the gallery. "Officer Russell stated that I was trespassing on government property," she said. "In reality, I was walking on a public sidewalk, approaching the main entrance of this courthouse at approximately 8:47 a.m. A public sidewalk is not a restricted zone." The stenographer's fingers hesitated. Lauren Clark, the prosecutor, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The calm confidence in Allison's words did not sound like the defendant they had painted her to be. Allison then pointed toward the table where her briefcase and papers had been collected as evidence. "He also claimed I was carrying stolen documents. Those papers are legitimate court files, memoranda, and daily schedules. All of them are official. I have lawful access to them." Her words hung in the air. Judge Elliot frowned, confusion creeping into his expression. "You seem unusually familiar with legal procedure. Do you have formal training, Ms.?" He glanced down at the sheet in front of him. "Edwards." Allison smiled faintly, but did not answer the question directly. "I think we'll get to that soon enough, Your Honor." In the gallery, one pair of eyes widened in shock. Bailiff Christian Ford, who had worked in the courthouse for over a decade, suddenly sat straighter. He knew that face. He had seen that woman before, not as a defendant, but walking through those very doors in authority. His heart pounded as the pieces began to click. Meanwhile, Blake Russell smirked, certain she was only buying time. "She's trying to act smart, Your Honor," he cut in. "This is what they always do, pretend to be someone important." Allison turned her gaze on him. Her calm expression did not waver. "You testified earlier that your body cam malfunctioned this morning, but as you know, county policy requires automatic cloud backups of body cam footage. That data is preserved whether your device is broken or not. I am requesting that this court issue an order to preserve and review all surveillance footage between 8:45 and 9:15 a.m. Murmurs spread through the room. Lauren Clark stood sharply. "Objection, Your Honor. The defendant cannot make evidentiary demands. She doesn't even have legal representation." Allison turned her head slowly, her eyes locking on the prosecutor. Pro se defendants have the constitutional right to present evidence in their own defense. That right is guaranteed. And under Brady v. Maryland, the prosecution is obligated to preserve any evidence that may prove innocence. I am simply asking that the law be followed. The silence in the courtroom was heavy. People began shifting in their seats, whispers spreading like wildfire. Who exactly was this woman? Judge Elliot cleared his throat. "Ms. Edwards, you seem unusually familiar with legal procedure. Do you have formal training?" Allison looked directly at him, her lips curving in the smallest of smiles. "I have more than a little experience with the judicial system, Your Honor. That will be clear soon enough." At that moment, Bailiff Christian Ford's realization was complete. His stomach dropped as he understood who sat before them. It was her, the very judge whose nameplate hung above the courtroom, the same judge he had worked with for years. The woman in cuffs was Allison Edwards. During the short recess that followed, Christian approached Allison privately, his voice trembling. "Judge Edwards," he whispered, horror etched across his face. I didn't recognize you earlier. I am so sorry." Allison met his eyes with calm reassurance. "You were not part of this, Christian, but now I need your help." "Anything, Your Honor," he replied quickly, his chest tight with guilt. "Go to my chambers," Allison instructed. "Bring my judicial robes, the black ones with the gold trim, and bring my gavel, the engraved one from my swearing-in ceremony. Quietly, no one must suspect." Christian nodded, his hands shaking, and rushed off to do as she asked. Allison was escorted to a small holding room. She sat in silence, her cheek still sore from the bruise, her wrists still marked from the cuffs. For a few moments, she closed her eyes and breathed deeply. She remembered her oath, her duty, and the years she had spent protecting justice. They had tried to humiliate her, but in a matter of minutes, she would reclaim what was hers. Her phone, returned to her by Christian, buzzed with messages. Her clerk, Sophia Rogers, had sent frantic texts. "Judge Edwards, where are you? The Peterson case is waiting. Attorneys are asking questions." Allison typed back quickly. "Clear my schedule. Something more important has come up." Then she scrolled to Chief Judge Madison Turner's number and called. When Madison answered, Allison's voice was steady. "I need you to immediately preserve all courthouse surveillance footage from this morning, every angle, and I want a review of every case Blake Russell has touched in the last 5 years. Do it now." There was a pause, then Madison's grave reply, "Consider it done." Moments later, Christian returned carrying a garment bag and a small box. He unzipped the bag and revealed the flowing black robes. Allison stood, lifting the heavy fabric and slipping it over her shoulders. The weight settled on her like armor, restoring her presence and authority. From the box, she lifted her ceremonial gavel engraved with the words, "Justice is blind, but she sees all." She held it firmly, her expression calm but fierce. "When we return to the courtroom," she said quietly to Christian, "announce me properly." "Yes, Your Honor," he replied, his voice full of respect. "How would you like to be announced?" Allison adjusted her robes, her back straight. "As always, the Honorable Judge Allison Edwards presiding."
When court resumed, the doors opened. Christian's voice boomed across the room. "All rise, court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Allison Edwards presiding." Gasps filled the chamber. Judge Thomas Elliott went pale, nearly stumbling back. Prosecutor Lauren Clark's mouth fell open, and Officer Blake Russell, once so confident, now stood frozen, his face drained of all color. Allison stepped through the chamber doors, robed and holding her gavel, walking with the calm dignity of someone who had walked this path countless times. She approached the bench, her rightful place, and sat slowly. Her eyes swept the room. Everyone in that courtroom now knew the truth. "Officer Russell," she said firmly, her voice echoing with authority, "you may remain standing." The silence in the courtroom was so heavy that even the sound of breathing seemed loud. All eyes were locked on the woman who had entered through the chamber doors, no longer a defendant in handcuffs, but a judge in her rightful robes. Allison Edwards sat behind the bench, her gavel resting firmly in her hand. The bruise on her cheek was still visible, but now it looked less like a mark of shame and more like a badge of truth. "Officer Blake Russell," she began, her voice steady, Just 2 hours ago, you testified in this courtroom. Do you recall your words?" Blake swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. He nodded weakly. "Let me remind you," Allison continued, her eyes narrowing. "You told this court that people like me always claim to be someone important to avoid accountability. You said I needed to learn that actions have consequences. Do you remember that?" The courtroom was so still that the hum of the lights above sounded like thunder. Blake's legs shook. He barely whispered, "Yes, Your Honor." "Good," Allison replied. She reached under the bench and lifted a tablet. "Because now, Officer Russell, this court will watch the real evidence." She tapped the screen and the large monitor on the wall flickered to life. The security footage from the courthouse steps appeared, clear and undeniable. The video showed Allison walking calmly toward the building with her briefcase. Then it showed Blake blocking her path, his words sharp and cruel. "Another ghetto rat trying to sneak in." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The video continued, showing the violent slap across her face, the chokehold against the wall, the handcuffs cutting into her wrists. Then came the words, captured perfectly. "Filthy animals like you belong in cages, not courthouses." A sharp cry escaped from someone in the gallery. Others covered their mouths in shock. The courtroom that had believed Blake's lies only moments ago now saw the ugly truth. Allison paused the video. "Officer Russell," she said firmly, "do you see any aggression from me in this footage? Any threats? Any profanity?" Blake stared at the floor. His silence spoke louder than any answer. "Very well," Allison continued. She swiped to a new file. "This is your body cam footage, automatically backed up to the county cloud. You claimed it malfunctioned. Let's see." The video played. Blake's voice filled the courtroom, dripping with hatred. "Look at this uppity woman thinking she can walk into my courthouse. Time to teach her a lesson." The sound was undeniable. Several people in the gallery shook their heads in disgust. Prosecutor Lauren Clark closed her folder slowly, her face pale as she realized she had sided with a lie. Allison turned to the two officers sitting in the back. "Adam Newman, Jack, you both swore under oath that Officer Russell handled this situation professionally. Would you like to correct your statements now?" The two men shifted uncomfortably. Neither dared to speak. Their silence was enough. The truth was now in the open. Allison placed the tablet aside and leaned forward. "This is not only about one officer's lies. It is about a system that allowed those lies to go unchecked for years." She picked up a thick file and held it up. "Officer Russell, you have 47 misconduct complaints against you in your 15-year career. 47. Most were dismissed as unsubstantiated, yet the pattern is clear. Over 1,000 arrests, 87% involving people of color. In those cases, your reports describe suspects in the same way you described me, acting erratically, refusing to comply, becoming aggressive. The same story, repeated again and again." She flipped the file closed with a sharp snap. "This morning, you didn't just assault a woman. You assaulted a judge. And worse, you assaulted justice itself. You thought no one would question you because the system always protected you. But today, that system failed you." Blake's face had gone pale. His hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the table. "Officer Russell," she continued, her voice stronger now, "this court finds you guilty of assault in the first degree, guilty of assault on a judicial officer, guilty of perjury under oath, and guilty of depriving a citizen of her civil rights under the color of law." The words landed like blows. Blake's knees buckled, and he collapsed into the chair behind him. His attorney, Vincent Wood, sat frozen, scribbling notes that no longer mattered. Allison raised her gavel slightly. For these crimes, and for the years of pain you have caused others, this court sentence you to 25 years in federal prison without parole." The gavel came down with a crack that echoed like thunder. The room erupted. Some gasped, some whispered, and some clapped quietly in approval. Blake sat slumped in his chair, tears streaming down his face. His career, his reputation, and his freedom were gone. But Allison was not finished. She stood, her robes flowing around her, and addressed the gallery. "This is not just about one man. This is about every person who was silenced, every complaint that was ignored, every life that was destroyed by abuse of power. From this day forward, no officer, no prosecutor, no judge, no one in this system is above the law." Her words carried weight. The courtroom, once filled with arrogance and lies, now filled with a different kind of silence, one of truth and accountability.
Months later, the effects of that day were still being felt. Blake Russell sat in a federal prison, his uniform replaced by prison clothes, his arrogance replaced by fear. The very system he once used to control others now controlled him. Federal investigators uncovered years of corruption in the department. 12 officers were fired, several faced charges. Hundreds of cases were reopened. Wrongfully convicted men and women walked free, their families reunited after years of pain. The courthouse itself was renamed the Justice Edwards Federal Courthouse, a reminder of the day truth stood tall. A bronze plaque was placed at the entrance with a simple inscription: "Here, justice found her voice." Allison Edwards became a national figure, invited to speak at law schools and conferences across the country. She told her story not for fame, but to remind everyone that justice can be delayed, but it cannot be silenced. And for those who sat in that courtroom on the day of her return, they would never forget the moment when a so-called powerless woman rose, put on her robes, and showed the world what true justice looks like. Because justice may wear a blindfold, but she sees everything. And when the time comes, she always hits back. Dear viewers, what a story. One woman was humiliated, slapped, and mocked in front of everyone. But in the end, truth stood taller than lies. Allison Edwards showed us that no matter how powerful someone may look in the moment, justice always has its way of catching up. The lesson here is simple. Abuse of power will never last forever. Lies may stand for a while, but truth always comes back stronger. Never underestimate yourself, and never think the truth will stay buried. If you were touched by this story, stay with us for more powerful and emotional stories like this. Please remember to like this video, share it with others, subscribe to the channel, and comment below where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring you more real and inspiring stories. Justice may be delayed, but it is never denied.